The fluorescent light above my desk had been flickering for 3 weeks. Facilities said they'd get to it. They never did. I'd stopped noticing. That's the thing about working somewhere long enough. You stop noticing a lot of things. I've been at Meridian Structural for 9 years. 9 years of getting in before 7, leaving after 6, eating lunch at my desk more often than not. I was a senior project coordinator, which sounds impressive until you understand what it actually means. I was the person who made sure everything ran. The permits, the subcontractor schedules, the compliance documentation, the pre-inspection walkthroughs. If something was falling through the cracks, my phone rang. Didn't matter if it was a Tuesday at 2 p.m. or a Saturday at dawn. I didn't mind. That's the honest truth. I actually loved the work. My name is James. I was 51 years old. I had a mortgage on a house in a mid-sized city where I'd raised 2 kids mostly alone after my wife passed, and I had a reputation in this industry that I'd built, brick by brick, over 2 decades. The guys on the sites knew me. The inspectors knew me. When I walked onto a floor and said the schedule was solid, people believed it because I'd never once told them something was solid when it wasn't. That matters in construction, more than people outside the industry understand. You cannot fake competence on a job site. The building either stands or it doesn't. My boss was a man named Howard Pell. Howard had been running the regional division for about 6 years, and he was the kind of manager who was good at one thing above all else, looking like he was the smartest person in any meeting. He dressed well, spoke confidently, and had an instinct for credit, specifically for absorbing it from people around him and presenting it upward as his own. I knew this. Most of us knew this. You learn to work around it. What I didn't know until a Monday in late October was that Howard had a nephew. The nephew's name was Brody. 26 years old, freshly finished with a business degree from a school I'd never heard of, and apparently very important to Howard in ways that had nothing to do with qualifications. Brody started on a Wednesday. I remember because I was in the middle of a coordination call with 3 subcontractors when Howard walked in past my office, paused, knocked on the open door, and introduced him as our new operations associate. I smiled and shook the kid's hand. He had a firm handshake and a confident smile and absolutely nothing behind his eyes when I mentioned the Kellner Avenue project. "Oh, I'll get up to speed," he said. I told him to come find me if he had questions. He never did. For about 8 weeks, Brody existed in the office the way a piece of furniture exists. Present, occasionally moved around, not particularly functional. He sat in on meetings. He nodded. He sent emails that were mostly forwarded versions of things other people had written. I watched Howard introduce him to clients with language that suggested more seniority than the kid had earned, but I held my tongue. Howard's choices were Howard's choices. Then came the November all-hands. Howard stood at the front of the conference room with that particular expression he used when he was about to announce something he was proud of. The room was maybe 20 people, coordinators, project leads, a few admin staff. "I want to talk about where we're headed structurally as a team," he said. He used the word structurally intentionally. Howard always chose his words for effect. He announced that Brody would be moving into the role of operations lead, effective immediately. I sat very still. Operations lead was the role I had been told in a meeting 8 months prior that I was being considered for. Howard had used the phrase, "You're the natural fit." I had that conversation in my memory with the clarity of something I'd replayed enough times that I could recite it word for word. Around the table, a few people glanced at me. I kept my face neutral. I'd learned over 9 years how to do that. After the meeting, I went back to my office. I sat down. The fluorescent light flickered once, twice. I looked at my desk, the stacks of binders, the site photos pinned to the wall, the laminated inspection checklists I'd built from scratch because the ones the company had were outdated and incomplete. I thought about my daughter, Nadia. She was 23 in her 2nd year of nursing school, and I was helping with her tuition. I thought about the mortgage. I thought about the fact that I was 51 years old and the industry was not, historically, kind to 51-year-olds who left positions without something lined up. I did not make any decisions that day. What I did instead was start paying very careful attention. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Brody attempt to run operations. He scheduled a materials delivery for a date when the site access road was legally closed for a city utility project, something that was in the permit documents he'd been given and apparently hadn't read. He carbon copied the wrong clients on 2 email threads, including one where a subcontractor had made some fairly candid remarks about timeline. He approved a change order without running the numbers, and the number he approved was off by a margin that would have cost us about $40,000 if our contracts manager hadn't caught it. Each time something went wrong, Howard quietly rerouted it to me to fix. He didn't ask. He just forwarded the email or stopped by my office with that expression that said, "You know what to do," and I did know what to do. That was the problem. I'd always known what to do, and I'd always done it, and somehow that had become the reason I could be overlooked rather than the reason I couldn't be replaced. I started keeping notes, not out of anger, out of habit. I've kept project logs my whole career, but this time I was also logging something else. Every task I completed that technically belonged to the operations lead role, every firefight I handled that Brody had started, every client call I took because Howard needed someone who actually knew the answer. By December, I had 6 weeks of documentation. I also had, quietly, 3 conversations. The first was with a former colleague named Pete, who ran his own independent project management consultancy. We'd stayed in touch over the years. I mentioned, without much detail, that I was considering options. He mentioned, without much pressure, that he'd been turning away work because he didn't have the right people. We left it there. The second conversation was with my accountant. I laid out my finances plainly and asked her what my actual runway looked like if I left without something immediate lined up. The answer was longer than I'd feared. 9 years of steady income and careful spending had given me more buffer than I'd let myself believe. The third conversation was with Nadia. I didn't want her to be blindsided. I told her I was thinking about making a change and that I wanted her to know before it happened. She asked one question, "Is this what you want, Dad, or is this you being pushed?" I thought about that for a while. "Both," I said. "I think both can be true." She nodded. "Okay, then do it right." I gave my notice on a Thursday morning in early January. I asked Howard if we could talk privately. He looked slightly puzzled. I'd never asked for a private meeting that he hadn't initiated. We went into his office. I handed him the envelope. He opened it, read it. "Read it again." "James." He set it down. I wasn't expecting this." "I know. Is this about the operations lead position?" "Because I can talk to you about, it's not about a position," I said. That was true. By then, it really wasn't. I've been here 9 years, I've valued the work. But I think it's the right time for me to do something different. He asked if I'd reconsider. I told him I'd given it a lot of thought. He looked at the letter again, then at me, then at the letter the way people do when they're trying to find the version of this conversation where they come out looking fine. I gave 4 weeks' notice. During those 4 weeks I documented everything. Every active project, every subcontractor contact, every pending permit, every quirk in the scheduling system that I'd learned to navigate and never written down because there'd never been a reason to. I put it all in a handover document that was 43 pages long. Brody was nominally the person I was handing over to. I watched him page through the document during our transition meetings with the particular expression of someone encountering more information than they'd bargained for. My last day was a Friday. People stopped by the office. There was cake. Howard gave a speech about my contributions that hit all the right notes and made me feel, briefly, the specific sadness of being genuinely valued by someone who hadn't acted like it when it mattered. I thanked everyone. I meant it. I drove home. It was late afternoon, cold, the sky doing that thing in January where it's already dark by 5. I sat in my driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The house was quiet. I thought about Nadia's question, is this what you want, or is this you being pushed? I still thought the answer was both. I called Pete the following Monday. We met for coffee, and by the end of the week, we had the outline of a consulting arrangement. I would come on as a senior associate, handling the complex coordination work that Pete's smaller clients couldn't staff internally. It wasn't a salary. It was project-based, which was both the risk and the freedom of it. The first few months were slower than I'd hoped and faster than I'd feared. I picked up 2 clients through referrals from people I'd worked with over the years. In March, I got a call from a general contractor I'd collaborated with closely on a hospital expansion project 4 years prior. He had a complicated commercial renovation in a historic building with tight tolerances and the permit situation that had stalled for 8 months. He asked if I could look at it. I could look at it. I spent 2 weeks on the permit situation alone. There were 3 overlapping jurisdictional issues that the previous coordinator had tried to resolve simultaneously, which was the wrong approach. You had to sequence them. I sequenced them. The permit started moving. The GC called me after the first approval came through. "Where were you 6 months ago?" he said. "Working for someone who didn't know what they had," I said. He laughed. I wasn't entirely joking. I found out through someone still at Meridian, a project lead I'd mentored for 3 years, a sharp woman named Carla who texted me occasionally, that things had gotten complicated after I left. Brody had lost 2 subcontractor relationships that I'd spent years cultivating. One of them, a masonry crew that was exceptional and in high demand, had simply declined to bid on Meridian jobs anymore. No explanation given, which is explanation enough in this industry. If a crew that wants work stops bidding your projects, they're telling you something. Howard had apparently brought in a consultant to review operations in the spring. I didn't ask what the consultant found. I didn't need to know. What I knew was this: by June, Pete and I had enough work that we were having conversations about whether to bring on a 3rd person. By August, I had cleared my first month where my consulting income exceeded what my Meridian salary had been. I didn't celebrate loudly. I'm not built that way. I told Nadia over dinner on a Sunday, and she looked at me across the table with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time, uncomplicated pride, and she said, "I told you to do it right." "You did," I said. "You did do it right." I thought about the 43-page handover document, the 6 weeks of notes, the conversation with my accountant, the call to Pete before I'd even made the decision, just to understand what was possible. I thought about Brody, who I held no particular anger toward. He was 26 and had been handed something he wasn't ready for by someone who should have known better. That's a hard position to be put in. The fault wasn't entirely his. I thought about Howard and the speech he'd given on my last day, and the fact that he'd meant it. He had genuinely valued me, and how little that had mattered in practice when it was time to make a decision. The fluorescent light in my home office works fine. I replaced it myself about a week after I left Meridian. Took 4 minutes. I don't know why I hadn't done it years ago. Some things you stop noticing. And then one day you don't work there anymore, and you fix the light, and you realize the noticing was always yours to begin with. You'd just been spending it in the wrong place.